Hey everybody, welcome to the Funnel Labs. This is Funnel Lab Fridays. I am your co-host, Doug Bell. I'm a fractional CMO and I am CMO at CaliberMind. My co-host, Eric Westerkamp, is currently in transit to Japan to go skiing, so we wish him well. I actually asked him the other day if he was going to Australia for skiing. That shows how bright I am. I'm excited to be welcoming Whitney Rosa to the show. Whitney is a Brightly. I'm going to have Whitney introduce herself in a minute. What I want to talk to you guys today about is what we're going to be talking about. Whitney and I just sort of chatted about the ins and outs of making the transition from an object-based to an engagement-based funnel. This is not for the lighthearted, sort of a cutting-edge activity that we're seeing out there. And we want to help you guys today sort of by talking about why, sort of what are the heuristics around it, and sort of how do we start thinking about making that transition. Okay, with that big old wind up, Whitney, welcome to the show. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Tell us about you. You've got some background in consulting, which I always love. So you've seen lots of different companies approach these things. You also work at a really cool company called Brightly. So tell us about you, your background. Tell us about Brightly.
Yeah, I'm Director of Marketing Operations at Brightly and support our marketing organization with all things related to both, technology and process, and really work to make sure we're working effectively and efficiently. And prior to joining Brightly, I worked as a consultant in the Salesforce space and with many marketing automation tools and businesses of a variety of different sizes, from small mom and pop startups to big enterprise companies, and really just love the world of operations and making everyone successful with the tools they have, because we all know you can't be a great marketer without great tools that work really well.
You're also really dangerous, and I'm not going to talk about your skiing career, Whitney. I'm sure that makes you dangerous in some form, but you've been on both sides. You're one of these folks that I love talking to because you get what it's like to run campaigns and you understand what it's like to enable people who run campaigns through great infrastructure. So keep that in mind, folks. I'm not going to ask Whitney to sort of talk about that part of her career, but she sort of knows both sides of these things. And I think it's important to understand that she's going to approach things from both sides.
Yeah, I worked
Okay.
for many years as a campaign manager, building out those campaigns and thinking about it. So I totally get both sides.
Did you hit your numbers? Whitney, is the question? I'm kidding. Don't answer that question. Different heuristics, right? Very different heuristics between the two. And it's great that you've got both sides of those things. It's an amazing experience. We're going to lean into that today because you're not just going to be talking about the theory of the transition. You know about what the application looks like as that sort of campaign person dealing with the change. That's really good stuff. Before we dig into it, folks, I just have to say, if you are thinking about this transition, you probably are if you're on the call today. There are just a very few platforms that can help you get that done. And so we're going to be talking about this idea of an engagement-based funnel. If you haven't checked out CaliberMind, go to the website, ask for a demo. We're going to be talking about sort of the how. I'm not going to be showing off the product, but I will tell you, you need a system that allows you to score engagement activity in order to be able to have an engagement-based funnel. You need ways to structure that. We're going to be talking about some of those models today. So please don't run to CaliberMind if you're thinking about this after you talk to Whitney and I, because guess what? We're going to share a lot of truth with you, Whitney. I wanted to open with a softball. I don't have one for you. I'm going to ask you a really hard question. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's
Okay.
go.
Is the object-based funnel dead?
Yes, of course. It's all about engagement, right? We see it in the B2C world. It's all about what are you doing? How are you doing it? When are you doing it? All of that. And it helps you have a better customer journey. And that's the same for B2B companies too. We have to think about what our customers want to hear, what our customers want to see, how do they want to engage with us, and creating our programs and our campaigns to help move them through the funnel effectively. It can't just be what we want or we think for them.
Okay. All right. So everybody that's on the call today, this does not mean that you're behind or you're bad. What we're really talking about is there's a transition underway, and
Yeah.
organizations and folks like Whitney are on the cutting edge. Let's just be honest. This idea of sort of object-based waterfall fun, like I don't think there's going to be a day when we're not at least using it to explain what's happening to non-marketers. So we're not saying that linearity and that idea of objects is dead. But Whitney, you nailed it out of the gate. So much of what is happening occurs well before a brand actually, a prospect, let's call it, encounters our brand on the website. It happens well before they engage with us on social media, right? Quite often it's happening out in the sort of, if we think about a data layer standpoint, it's happening out with intent, right? There's sort of sending signals, and our job is to capture those signals and then rationalize it for our friends in the sales organization. Because guess what? Things are so complex for these guys. Like, hug a seller. Things are not easy for these folks. So the first thing I want to do is to sort of talk about why would an organization sort of, what are the dividing points? We're going to talk about waterfalls. We're just going to work through a logic tree. You ready, Whitney? We're going to sort of talk about, like, okay, why would you need to think about this transition? So Whitney, give us our first sort of thought about when are organizations in a spot where they need to be thinking about this change?
Yeah, it starts when your deal size is getting larger, right? And you're starting to sell to buying teams rather than individual people. So at that point, it becomes more about how do we usher all of these people along and give all of the different personas and titles and engaged buyers the information they need. What your CMO who's buying a tool needs is different than what, the MarOps person is looking at, right? So we need to serve them the right type of content, but we also need to make sure they're all engaged and they're involved in the process and they're buying in. And so it starts with that, right? It's not just a single buyer buying your product anymore. It's a buying team. And I think that along with the deal size is a good indicator of it's time to evolve.
Okay. Okay. So we're going to be overly simplistic, and I'm going to throw a number out there, Whitney, and you tell me if I have this right. But sort of the ACV, and we're really in the SaaS conversation right now, so I'm going to use terms like ACV and ARR. But sort of for me, it's the dividing point between I can buy something without a committee versus I need other people involved, and that's sort of at this like 25-30K ACV. Would you say that's just about right?
Yeah, I think a lot of organizations have that threshold in their world, right? Where we all have to, you know, get that second confirmation that it's a smart spend and it's a smart move for our company. So I like that number. Yeah.
Okay, okay. And that's and really it's an analog for what you talked about, Whitney, which was how many people do we have involved in the buyer journey, right? If it's a single person, then lead-based works, right? And traditional funnels can work, right? But if we're starting to try and influence buying committees, and so as we sort of get upper ACV, so like the 100, 150, 200K, I think people have been deploying engagement-based tactics and funnels for a long time. They just don't think about it from a funnel standpoint. They call it ABX,
Yeah.
right? So they're sort of different thing, but sort of ABX and inbound are sort of coming together, and that's what we're talking about today. So what
Yeah.
are sort of the other indicators that you need to be thinking about that transition over to an engagement-based funnel? Then I want to talk about what the heck is an engagement-based funnel, so we can sort of unpack this for folks.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really comes down to, are we targeting the right people, right? At this point, when you have buying cycles, you have a variety of different titles you're going after, you have complex segmentation, you're trying to serve up content to the different groups that you're going after. And it creates, that's a lot to manage, right? As a single marketer, it's a little bit easier when you have one target, you have one persona, one segment, and you can just continually create and serve content. Once that gets broad and varied and you're trying to hit all these different people, it gets a little complex. And so you have to really understand, where are they in their journey? Am I covering the funnel enough? Am I serving enough content? Are they getting stuck somewhere? Are they like, petering out at, the top of the funnel and creating a log jam essentially, or are we moving them through? And, what titles are we losing in the funnel, right? Like all of those questions start to come into play when you increase your segmentation and you start thinking about more buying groups. So I think that's a kind of an inflection point, right? It's not that, one or two groups we're segmenting on with one or two different key messages. It's a variety, right? It's a little bit more broad of what we're segmenting, what we're saying, and the personas we're going after.
This I'm trying to come up with a way for people to sort of visualize what we're talking about here, and I think that, Whitney, the first thing I'm going to say is that we're not talking about the end of that funnel. And when I say object-based funnel, what I'm saying is a way of measuring the progress of a deal from a contact to a lead. In other words, the sort of meta structure of CRM and maps, right? All the
Yep.
way through to an opportunity. I think people understand that. And also this idea of linearity. And
Right.
that's what, typically all deep thinking for men occurs in the shower. And so this morning in the shower, I was reminded of, and this might be aging me or dating me a bit. There's a comedy troupe, BBC comedy troupe called Monty Python, and they would have these just ridiculous skits, Monty Python on the blah blah blah. One of the skits was they have all these guys lined up for a race, and the announcer says, "This is a race for people with no sense of direction." And instead of them running down the track, they all go a different direction, right? And that's the bit. It's just like one little moment. It's literally like 5 or 6 seconds. and boom, they're going off in different directions. And so to me, that is the transition, sort of the old linear, I'm going to run right down that track. And if I can make it through all those gates, I'm going to be your winner, meaning I'm going to drive a deal cycle for you. But what's quite often happening is everybody's just going in 10 different directions. So let's talk
Yeah.
about sort of the reality, what's happening out there. So let's talk about one change that's occurred, slowly, but I think recently that's been a rapid change, which is that a lot of people are encountering our brands well before they engage with the website. Because guess what? We marketers have gotten really good at putting really cool paid social content out there in front of them. So Whitney, like I think we're talking about is like a hybrid funnel in a lot of ways. So how do you sort of think about that? How do you record that? How do you deal with that? Is that just third party data and you sort of set it aside and go, don't know what to do with it?
No, you have to use it, right? Data is king. It helps us make informed decisions. So, we're investing in those channels, and marketers, you're right, have done a great job of creating more channels and more avenues for us to go after and find prospects. But we have to know what's working. We have to know what's converting, and we have to know we're getting the ROI on our spend. I don't know one company that's like, sure, go spend as much as you want, wherever you want, and don't tell us how it's performing. Like, that's crazy. We all have to know exactly where every dollar's going and how much revenue it's bringing in the door. So, yeah, that anonymous data, that top of funnel data is really crucial, right? And it lets us know, where are we finding our ideal customers, where are we investing that's actually working for us way down the funnel, and where is it not, right? So if we don't look at the data, we're really being a little bit irresponsible as marketers. And so, yeah, I think you have to start to pull all those channels together and look at them not only just by channel and investment, but you have to look at it by channel and what stage of the funnel they are in, and where does that channel play, right? Some channels play really well towards the bottom and some play really well towards the top. And you have to learn and know from the data what is working for your organization. And that's where the engagement-based funnel, right, comes into play, because it lets us see, what is engaging at the top of funnel, what's helping convert, what's helping to move those people through, just as much as it is at the bottom, right? And so it becomes less about we have a channel and we use it, and it becomes more about we have a channel and we use it in this specific way, in this specific part of our funnel, and we see this much ROI.
Yeah, Whitney, you're getting to a great point that I really want to expose for folks, which is um, at the end of the day, you have different channels that perform differently at different stages of the funnel. And so we're not trying to trash this idea of linearity or the Plinko machines that sort of represent the current model, but in many ways saying that we've got really two gaps. And Whitney, you did a great job of exposing this. The sort of first gap is what's performative at the very top of your funnel. And am I able sort of to predict what's going to be happening up there? So as an example, a lot of companies have struggled to know what to do with intent data, but if you're able to relate that intent data to your third party data layer, you're sort of creating, you will, if you will, this upper funnel that's an engagement based funnel. But really, Whitney, what you're talking about is channel based funnel efficiency. So, really good example. And the reason people put so much money into SEO, website content is that typically is a high converting channel across the funnel, but that's fairly rare. And it's high converting because guess what? Whitney, that's high intent. People are showing a lot of intent if they're going through a search and they're hitting your
Yeah.
website. That's first party data as well. And it's easy to capture. But quite often people are making that buyer's journey occur from paid social media, Reddit, Twitter, Facebook. Like it's occurring there. They're investigating there. And again, we're getting some of those signals quite often from intent data before that. And we know those things blend, by the way, but sort of simplistically to talk about that. And quite often, a lot of the buyer's journey and a lot of those conclusions that the buyers has been drawn when they get to your site. In other words, they've done a lot of research. By the way, G2's in there too, right? And they've done a lot of research. So when they arrive at your site, they're more high intent than they've ever been. But what we're really also talking about here, Whitney, ultimately is that the linearity thing. So I just said like, hey, linearity is not dead. But what we're really also talking about here is that, people who are not high intent, let's just say SEO, who go right through the funnel, there are folks that are still in that investigation phase. And you sort of talked about using the right channels at each of those stages to sort of engage folks. So this is where your danger comes in, Whitney. This is where the structural hat, the systems hat, and then sort of the program hat work. So what should be people, let's start with the systems piece. How should people be sort of rationalizing and thinking about the different supporting systems through the engagement based funnel? What are some of the things they should be thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to think about all of our tools and our platforms, right? Like using intent is a great example. Matching your intent with what you see in your map and what you see in your other tools gives you so much visibility into, what are we doing with our leads? How are they progressing through? And you become really powerful when you can say, oh, look, I see from this tool they're doing this, and I see from that tool they're doing this, and then I can make this assumption or this observation from our data, and you can make really smart decisions. You can start to segment a little bit more. Leveraging the tools, right, with the activity almost creates more of those diverse segmentations that you need to have more of this hybrid engagement-based funnel. So you have to have the tool and tech to be able to get the data just as much as you have to have the personas and the advancement in your business to be there to make that progression.
And so, Whitney, you've also been on the consulting sides, which quite often recognizes you've got three things you're thinking about. You're thinking about sort of methodology. You're thinking about systems. So in other words, campaigns and systems. But then you sort of had the human factor of like, how do I explain to people that their funnels are no longer as linear as they used to be? And I'm going to introduce more stages to them. I'm going to introduce more concepts. So one way I've heard, and I will tell you, CaliberMind recommends highly, is thinking about engagement as events, and there's sort of pre, if you will, there's sort of pre I'm raising my hand events, and
Yep.
that follows a certain pattern. And there's post raising my hand, and post raising my hand, by the way, just means I signed up for something, a demo or whatever I'm at a booth, right? And so for me, just sort of explain to me how you recommend people going about the human aspect, which is sort of explaining the virtues of and why you would think about making this transition.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all are really familiar with scoring models, right? Some of us score better than others, and I think that's where that comes in, right? It's really easy to look at events and assign them a score and give that score that value in the funnel, right? And say, okay, if someone's doing XYZ, they're progressing through. But often that's not enough, right? We all have the example where you can be Bob the cleaner and you have a high converting form on your website, you give it a ton of points. Bob fills out the form, like, that's great. Bob just progressed, but we don't actually need a cleaner. We're great. Our office is super clean. Like, this was a dud of a lead. And look what I did. And so I think that's where you can start to think about those demographic, that firmographic data, and start to pull that in. So it's not only marrying activity and events and engagement, it's marrying it with, is this the right person for my business? Is this someone that I can actually sell my product to? And then you start to look at, okay, now they're engaging and they're scoring and they're progressing, and I think they're going to be the right person for us. And you start to move those people through, and so then you start investing better, right? You're putting your dollars for paid programs and campaigns and webinars and all of that into people who actually have a lot of potential to become customers. So you start to see your ROI go up, and you start to see people move through a little bit better because you're wasting less time on the noise and you're focusing more on, who do I need to go after? Who is actually a potential customer? So I love a scoring model. I love blending those different types of models together, whether it's behavior or firmographic or demographic. I think they all play a role, right? And then you can get really advanced even and say, okay, now I have scoring, now I have firmographic, demographic, but I also have intent too. So how can I blend the intent data and the intent scores I'm getting with that to even make it more focused and targeted?
Okay. And what are sort of so I'm going to give you a sign, and Whitney, I'm going to ask you to give me what you see as sort of a really good signal that it's time to make that transition. And I will tell you that the what I see quite often is there's two sort of symptoms. One is we're getting a lot of activity in third party data land, and how do I make that into good stuff? Those, by the way, that was a technical term. Good stuff, make into good stuff, right? The second thing I'm seeing is that your funnel performance starts getting a little wonky. And what I mean by that is you'll see like your MQA to SAO or your MQA to SQL, whatever, or MQL to SQL, whatever your stages are. It starts flexing and changing like
Mm,
month to month and quarter to quarter. And because what I'm seeing there quite often is that, exactly to your point, you said Bob the cleaner. Let's say that I'm selling cleaning supplies, and Bob the cleaner is actually Bob the cleaner of a cleaning organization. Then they are the best possible and should receive the highest score. And quite often, I might want to interact with Bob if I can de-anonymize his data before he fills out a form.
yeah.
And the reason I want to do that is it has been true since the Mesopotamians created marketing 3,000 years ago. first in the deal quite often is usually the best in the deal, right? So if somebody's showing up on the site, they're filling out that demo form, even if they're Bob the cleaner, and if they've already engaged with 3 or 4 other brands and you're an also brand, right? So it's you're sort of tactically moving up. And so that's my heuristic. It is I've got like I don't know how to sort of deal with this goodness at the top. I need to understand tactics for bringing them down. So top meaning first party data, third party data, and then sort of in the middle, my numbers are changing and the conversion rates are really wacky. What about for you? What are sort of signs like, uh-oh, we need to think about engagement based funnels?
Yeah, I think that's such a great one, right? And I think too, I think it's also like when you become a little bit more robust with your content and your messaging and your positioning, right? I think when you start to understand, or you need to start understanding, like, hey, we have a really robust content program. We run a lot of different content via different channels, right? And we start to say, like, okay, now we've got a lot at our fingertips to use as marketers. What do I use when, and how do I know what's the right thing? Like, we can all go look up best practices, and that's a great starting point. But eventually, right, you want to know specifically, like, do our webinars convert at the bottom of the funnel, or are they actually converting at the top of the funnel? And sometimes you'll see that shift, right? Like, webinars historically work like top of funnel for you, but all of a sudden your data shifts and you're like, wow, we got tons of SQLs out of that webinar. Like, oh, well, was it the content? Was it just a fluke? Like, what was it? And I think that's where you start to get that engagement data, and you use it over time, and it gives you more of those insights, and it starts to say, like, oh, okay, we saw engagement on this activity, or we saw engagement on this content, and it's actually driving a ton of revenue, or we see it drive a lot of conversions and touches, but we actually need way more engagement for the revenue to show up. And so then you can start to position your content and your activities in the right place in the funnel so that you have that more consistent conversion throughout instead of that ebb and flow.
I got to ask here, Whitney, and thank you for that. Would you rather be sort of in a cutting edge organization like Brightly, where you guys are sort of pushing the envelope of what's possible? Is that a more or less comfortable place than just sort of being in the land where it's a lead, it's an MQL, it's a SAO? Like, is is that a more challenging environment, or is it a less challenging environment because sort of everybody's rowing towards this best practice land?
I think as marketers, right? Like, it's our job and it's our role to always be pushing the envelope, right? I had someone tell me years ago that, like, if you stop learning, if you stop progressing, you're just falling behind. And it's so true, right? Like, we have to, there's technology, there's, economic headwinds, there's so many things working against us every day as a marketer. So if we're not constantly looking at what are we doing, what's our data telling us, and how do we iterate and improve and do better from that, then we are going to fall behind. And that's true. And I don't know, I was like a college athlete and have been an athlete my whole life. I really like to get better and improve. So for me, it's, yeah, I love being on, like, the cutting edge. I love driving change. I love pushing us forward, because at the end of the day, it makes us a better business. It makes, you know us better marketers. And I think, it keeps us cutting edge, it keeps us growing, and we all want to do better, right?
Okay. Spoken like a true competitive athlete. So, Whitney, let's go back to the sort of the model we're talking about here. We talked a lot about intent and first and third party data, and using different channels to sort of help us manage that. And by the way, it's changing all the time. You know, port me back to May of 2024 before the LinkedIn algorithm update. Like, these things just change so constantly, right? So,
Yeah,
and I agree with you. Like, our job sort of is to be out there pressing and being on the cutting edge.
like
So we
YouTube.
sort of talked about that transition. What's that? Sorry.
Like YouTube, everybody's on YouTube searching. It's not just, your paid ads anymore, right? Like, more of our population is looking at that channel. So how do we use that? If we're not, we're falling behind. It's growing as a search engine even beyond Google. So, I guess just a proof point, right? That we have to kind of continually adapt and grow and find new ways to do what we do.
Oh, the TikTok of content for B2B, it's happening.
Yeah.
Whitney, as we prepared for this, I told you what the hook was going to be for social media. Like, I was like, this is what's going to bubble through. Are you okay with that? Right. And so, yes, you're right. And I will say that that's a big part of how buyers want to consume information. They want to be able to do it at their own pace and in their own time. And that is where I think, by the way, I've been sort of slamming demand gen and talking about demand capture for a while now, but that is a place where you can sort of set the seeds for demand gen, if you will. Like, I didn't know there was a solution. I'm going to create this idea of a solution. I'm going to put it to you in a TikTok video format. It's going to stick in your head. You're going to have a problem, but it's still this sort of extended cycle. All those things are true. And that actually brings me back to sort of the other piece I wanted to talk to you about today, Whitney, which is this idea that linearity is going away, right? So again, life was so much easier 10 years ago when the funnels really worked the way we wanted them to, right? Very much. But now what we're really talking about is, I'm just going to use object-based stages to sort of lay this out for you in this question. But I'm going to just say that, let's say that an MQA can be an MQA. It's like Schrodinger's cat, and it can also not be an MQA, meaning
Yeah.
somebody may have gotten to the point through scoring that we go, this is somebody that we need to be engaging with. And let's like also split it up between anonymized and de-anonymized, depending on how you're scoring things, right? It could be an MQA or not an MQA. Let's pretend for a moment it's an engagement-based model, and you know it's an account, but you can't de-anonymize to the point that you can go after them, right? That's still an MQA, but guess what? If you're not able to get a hold of them, or if they go sideways, you're sort of defaulting back to a higher stage. So it's finding ways to sort of represent the looping nature of prospects in the buyer journey. Is that your
Yeah.
experience as well?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's just like human nature, right? I mean, I always like to refer to B2C a little bit, or direct to consumer, right? Because like we all go and buy the like jeans, right? And we go visit the website and we look around and we're like, yeah, I want those jeans. And then, we get distracted and other things come up or we're not sure and we set it aside for a while and then you kind of forget. And then, next thing, the next week you're like, oh man, I really should have ordered those jeans. I really need them. I mean, we all have that same experience. We're all humans, whether it's jeans or software, it happens, right? We all have competing priorities in our roles, and it's not linear, right? And we all have had the experience in companies where it's like, yeah, we're gonna go do this thing, and then a week later it's like, that thing, we're gonna wait on that thing, right? Like that's just life, and that's business, and it's people, and that happens. So we see that in our funnels, right? You have people that come through and they've showed great intent and they really are excited, they're just not ready. And that's where I think marketing can play such a big role, because it's like, oh, okay, we can keep these people warm for the sales team, we can keep them engaged, we can send them reminders, we can get them back. And sometimes they do, and they come back and they open the opportunity and it goes on. It's just, we can't prescribe a journey for someone because it's what we want them to do. That doesn't work, right? We have to adapt our process and our strategies to what humans do. And humans get distracted and have priorities change. So as marketers, we need to account for that. And I think that's where the engagement funnel comes into play, right? You see them go down in terms of engagement and intent, and you're like, okay, great. We're going to put them on like the slow drip nurture program and we'll keep them warm and engaged. And then next thing you know, they're scoring up, their intent score is high, and you're like, okay, let's go. Let's give them the more frequent drip. Let's invite them to a webinar. Let's get them more engaged. And it might be that moment where the opportunity comes, but it's our job to keep them coming back through and making sure they don't forget about us.
Yeah, yeah, we've all had that moment, and even marketers who do this for a living have that moment where you talk to your partner about going skiing at Vail, and then there's an ad.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, guys, we're not listening to your conversation. We're just really good at understanding you as a buying cohort and other activity, third-party activity.
Right.
So because maybe you looked at a pair of ski pants online, to your point, you decided not to buy them. That's when we're going to advertise. So that's a creepy thing, folks. That's what we do, we marketers. So Whitney, I'm going to attempt to recap a really good conversation today, and we really appreciate you being on the Funnel Lab with us. So thank you. So the first thing is, find a seller and hug a seller, because guess what? That buyer journey is no longer linear. It's really hard. These are the most effective project managers and sellers, frankly, and marketers on some level, because guess what? We're designing these systems to help them deal with all the ambiguity. That's one. Two, if you're not making the transition, don't worry, you're not behind. It is pretty cutting edge. And three, really, at the end of the day, if you're seeing weakness in your funnel, weird conversion rates changing over time, really what we're talking about is this might be a sign to start looking into tracking your engagement, scoring that engagement based on events, and using that to, at least at a minimum, start rationalizing the top of your funnel. This is all the intent data. This is third-party data before you're getting to first-party data. And just that activity will help a lot of companies understand sort of how to not just rationalize that data, but how to act on it. Whitney, I really appreciate you being on today. You're sort of on the bleeding edge of all this fun stuff, and you're in marketing operations. How many times you get to say bleeding edge of marketing operations? Well, there you are. So we appreciate your time, and thanks for joining us on the show.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
We're gonna have you back someday, Whitney. We're gonna talk about that downhill skiing career of yours. So again, thanks for being on the show. Also, former competitive athlete as well. So always love talking to folks like you, just because you sort of get it and you're competitive in your role. So, folks, thanks for joining us on the Funnel Lab. We're gonna be back with our top 5 AI and marketing analytics tools. Myself and Angela Hill coming up in a couple weeks, and I'm excited to announce we've got Tracy Earls coming on from NetApp. All right, folks, thanks for spending some time with us today. Cheers.
Thanks.